It's literally like every other week something's breaking or not working the way it's supposed to. I think it cost me like $150. We're on track this year to double our first year sales. Cost me about $60,000. My name is Steven Martinez. I own Basalt. We started the business in 2020, February, at the Fulton Street Farmers Market, selling ready-to-eat, hot-held breakfast tacos. That was kind of the end of a process that had started in 2019, where I had kind of gotten to a point where I decided I was either going to leave the food industry altogether or I was going to work for myself. Like summer 2019, I started teaching myself how to make tortillas, and it took till February to get to a point where I felt comfortable selling something. That process started in summer of 2019, using YouTube videos basically to teach myself how to make tortillas. I grew up eating a lot of Tex-Mex, one because I'm from Texas, and two because I grew up in a Latino household, so we were eating all that food all the time growing up, but none of my parents really had time to like do from scratch food, you know, so I was familiar with that kind of food but not how to do it. And I knew kind of from the start whatever I did needed to be like from scratch and needed to be kind of precise to what I wanted and the vision that I have. And a little of that is maybe control issue, but a lot of it was that I just want to make sure that I was really representing the kind of food and the kind of experience that I wanted folks to have when they eat my food. So YouTube videos for tortillas, really diving deep into different cookbooks and thinking about a lot of my favorite restaurants back in Houston, a lot of like eating out for research purposes kind of thing, you know. I kept a journal for nearly a year that was completely devoted to every meal that I was having, and I created this rubric that was basically what was the food, what did I like about it, what didn't I like about it, what would I do different. And the whole point of that was just to get me thinking about food in a more critical way than I ever had before, kind of breaking it down so I could kind of understand the full picture. And with that, I started building my own recipes, thinking about the flavor profiles that I was interested in. And actually, originally, Basalt was intended to be kind of a higher end Tex-Mex concept, like a dinner and drinks concept. And I hosted 2 meals at my home for friends that I basically gave them like a blind card to fill out with notes and criticisms about every dish. And we did, I think the first meal was like 4 courses and the second meal was 7 courses, I think. And all that stuff was very like, I don't know, I think I had it in my head at the time that it was going to be like kind of fancy chef driven kind of thing, you know, but I wasn't really sure how to get my foot in the door just in terms of like building a business. And so I thought about basically like, where's the best place that I can get a lot of eyes and a lot of mouths on what I'm doing, and the farmers market was the first place to come to mind there. Breakfast tacos seemed like the most natural way to do that, since it's a morning market, and that's something that I really love and love making and eating anyways. It was probably like between August and December was like a lot of recipe dev and a lot of learning, and not just like food learning, but also diving a little deeper into my own like heritage and culture, and kind of trying to understand why the food that I grew up eating was the way it was and where it came from, and having a deeper understanding of what like Tex-Mex actually is compared to like Mexican cuisine and like Tejano food and Tejano culture, which really influences, you know, Tex-Mex food. And then it was like end of December through February was all the technical stuff, you know, picking a name for the business. That was like a 2-month process. I actually had registered domains under like 3 different names before I finally picked Basalt, because I kept thinking I had it, and I was like, no, I gotta find something else that fits better. And then really from like all of that to making the food and selling my first taco, like that was the shortest period of time when it came to like executing the business. I think it was like a week and a half between like, okay, I think I know exactly what I'm gonna do, and now I'm at the farmer's market with, I think I took like 28 tacos for my first thing, and I was selling them for like $2.50 a piece. It was wildly underpriced, but I was like, I didn't know. I was like, I don't know what people will, you know, pay for this thing that they they don't even know what it is. And then, of course, I did that, I think, 2 weeks, and then COVID hit and everything shut down. But yeah, it was just a lot of like solo learning time, and then like bouncing food ideas off of friends, and kind of trying to figure out what is the tone, basically, of the food. What do I want people to feel when they eat?
What was the process of transitioning from the farmer's market to a brick and mortar?
We were at the farmer's market from May through October, once, COVID restrictions lifted. And in that period of time, we went from pre-making and hot holding tacos to, I had actually purchased a trailer. So it was a really basic, like, open air trailer with just like a 32-inch flat top grill and some hot wells. So we operated that for a couple months, and I think that was the biggest period of growth at the farmer's market. That's kind of when we started seeing people a little more curious about the food, and also where we started like gaining regulars. And without that transition, I don't know that I would have transitioned to a brick and mortar as quickly as I did, or if I would have even wanted to at all, because that transition really showed me like, okay, people not only like this, but they're excited about it and they're coming back. We went from orders being, oh, I'll get one and check it out, to, oh, I'm getting a full order to take back to my family, and I see these people every Saturday or every other Saturday, So going from the farmer's market to the brick and mortar, it was the most important thing was feeling confidence that I could get people to come here, and the most important part of that was kind of feeling like I had a following already, which we had built at the farmer's market. But I found the space on Craigslist. I literally just it was like around Christmas time, and I was back home in Texas and bored, and I was like, well, let me just see what's out there. And I was like on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, and like literally Googling like commercial restaurant spaces in Grand Rapids, and I found this listing here in Easttown. I had lived here in Easttown about 10 years ago, and I really love this neighborhood. I love the uptown area in general, but I knew that our concept being a little bit different from what people in West Michigan are used to for breakfast and brunch, and especially being very different from anywhere else in the area selling like tacos or anything kind of taco adjacent. I thought if we were going to do well anywhere, it would be in a neighborhood that's kind of known for being a little weird and having some, out there kind of businesses and residents, So yeah, I found this listing on Craigslist when I was down in Texas. I just reached out, and I think once I got back to the state, it was like a week and a half between seeing the place for the first time, kind of negotiating lease and getting the keys. And I really didn't have a plan at that point. I hadn't like conceptualized what a dining space would look like for Basalt. For the most part, it had been completely focused on the food. Like I wrote my business plan to get the lease, like that was like something they asked for. And I was like, oh sure, I've got one of those, We got the keys in, I think it was like February 1st of 2021, and we opened our doors April 14th, I believe.
And can you talk about the investments going to a restaurant that may be different from starting at a farmer's market to like what you need here?
It's really a huge gap between what it was like starting the business at the farmer's market and then opening the brick and mortar. The farmer's market was so ideal because it was super safe. The risk was so minimal. My biggest costs were like a couple chafing dishes and then the raw ingredients, to cook my food. So, I think overall, it cost me like $150 to sell my first taco at the farmer's market, to get this space open for service here without furniture, without about a third of the equipment that we have right now. I mean, we opened bare bones, cost me about $60,000, and that was like really difficult to come by. There was a lot of things where it was like, I bought two of our major pieces of equipment there in the kitchen on Facebook Marketplace because I could get it for 20% of the price. Does my deep fryer always want to turn on? No, but it also cost me like $150, and those are $1,000 new. It was a lot of like being kind of scrappy and figuring out the interior. It was me and a few friends over the course of 2 months, spending mornings and nights down here refinishing bathroom floors and fixing holes in the walls and painting and all that kind of stuff. So huge investment in time, and just an exponentially considerably larger investment in money as well. I was very fortunate that I was able to make a lot of investments in like small equipment while I was at the farmer's market, because I was taking every sale that I was making and just purchasing more pans and spatulas and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So when we opened, we had all of our small wares ready for service, which was great. We ran a small Kickstarter campaign that really helped kind of push us to where we needed to get, but we had to finance a few things, and I had some gifts from family as well.
What are your day-to-day operations back then versus now?
We actually talk about this quite a bit because we're in a bit of a growth period right now. Last winter, just for a little background, last winter we saw this huge dip in sales compared to the previous summer, that first summer we were open. And so we were really prepared for a similar drop this year. But we're actually busier right now during winter than we were this past summer. And we're at this point where we're now kind of joking about how when we feel like we're having a slow day, well, back that, you know, first 6 months, first year that we were open, our slow day now would have been like an unheard of busy day back then, you know, like it's really interesting, not just like how things have changed and progressed since then, but also like how we have adapted to it. We're on track this year to double our first year sales. We'll say that kind of like middle 8 months between like the first year and this end of the second year was the toughest time for the business. I think we just hadn't quite kept up with what folks were expecting after COVID. And when we opened, dine-in still wasn't allowed. So we could get away with not having tables and chairs, not having, real like silverware, that kind of stuff. It took a lot of investment to get all those things in here and to build up the space into what it is now. And I think it took a little longer than some folks were wanting because people were so eager to get back to like a regular, quote unquote, regular dining experience. That first year felt like 1,000 small victories, but looking back, it was a lot of baby steps and like a lot of mistakes and a lot of learning. And now we're, businesses way higher. We have a regular set of folks who come in just from the neighborhood alone. We've started to become a neighborhood establishment, which is really great. That first year too is interesting because the space that we're in right now had in like the 5 or 6 years before us had about a half dozen tenants that just didn't stick around for one reason or another. So we actually had quite a few people who came in those first 6 months or so that we were open and would say things like, this is a cursed location, like we'll be sorry to see you go, or like, oh, you better be careful. We had people coming in at the end of that first year who were like, well, we've been wanting to try you, but we figured you would be closed by now and we didn't want to like get attached, right? Which is such a silly thing. It's like, well, the easiest way to help keep us in business is to, buy our stuff. So it's been really interesting between that first year and now to see the way attitudes about us have changed too, because I think since it used to be a Sammy's Euro, a pita house in here like 8 years ago now. So we're now, I believe, the longest tenant in this space since them, which is pretty cool. We're now having people kind of celebrating that we've been here for so long. We haven't done too much in the way of marketing. Mostly it's our social media presence that we use for marketing. And a big part of that is, our budget is still super tight, right? Margins aren't huge in restaurants. I'm very intentional about the way I pay my employees, try to make sure that they're at least at a living wage. So there just isn't a lot of the kind of flexibility that a lot of other more traditional restaurants have. So we don't spend on advertising besides like the occasional Instagram boost, something like that. It has been mostly, I think, a little bit of like SEO magic. Just I've gotten a little bit better at that. It used to be you could barely find us on Google, and now, half the new folks who come in are saying they Googled brunch and that's how they figured us out. And that was like, that's a direct something I did in December. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize I didn't have this set the right way, But most of it's word of mouth. It's people telling their coworkers, their friends, their neighbors, their family family to come check it out. And I think too, just the longer a place exists, the more of a footprint it has. So people who drive down the street every day, I'm sure you've noticed this kind of phenomenon where you take the same route to work or school or wherever, and suddenly one day you're like, I've never noticed that house before. And like, it's obviously been there since before you lived around here. So I think we're a little bit of that phenomenon too, of people going, oh, I didn't know what that was. I didn't realize that building was a restaurant. Let's go check it out. I do think it's mostly just kind of a time and footprint thing. And we're fairly consistent in our product too, so that keeps people coming back. And the more people come back, the more likely they are to tell other people about it, to bring other people with them, and just kind of a slow networking effect, basically.
Can you talk about the food and the menu and what you offer?
Our food, or our menu is brunch centered, really heavy breakfast. I'd say probably like 30% of the menu is kind of non-breakfast stuff, but very much focused on that. A lot of that just has to do with like, that's the kind of food that I'm excited about. I also I don't like working at night, so I was like not going to open a restaurant that was centered on dinner, which is a big part of the reason why the concept kind of changed from that kind of like, oh, plated, like full service dinner thing to maybe something a little more casual, something that we can have a little more fun with too. I think brunch and breakfast really has a lot of room to play without feeling cheap. So internally, the way we talk about our food is sophisticated fun. We try to use really high quality ingredients. We shop locally and seasonally when we can. We're really intentional about the way we build every menu item. We have rules, like for tacos, like there are rules about, how many ingredients can be in a taco and what flavor profiles and that kind of thing that we follow for anything. But primarily, like I was saying before, this is the food that I grew up eating: breakfast tacos and migas and tamales and all those kinds of things. And that's just the food that I love. And like in West Michigan, it's just not really very present. When I first came here in 2007, like I'd ask people, where can I get some good breakfast tacos? And it wasn't just like oh, that's not a thing here. It was like, what is a breakfast taco? It was like trying to explain a concept, which to me felt very like self-evident, like, well, it's a taco, but for breakfast, can you imagine? But people, not just 10, 15 years ago, but even now, like there are people who that concept is so foreign to them. I remember one time at the farmer's market, this guy walked by and like saw our menu and he goes, tacos for breakfast? No way. And like kept going. And the next week we had shirts made that said, it's never too early for tacos. That's just like what I love. To me, it's like the best breakfast isn't, a skillet or a, bowl of oatmeal or like a plate of eggs and potatoes. Like it's something a little more complex and a little more fun. And that's what I love so much about Tex-Mex food specifically, is it's a little bit more than what it's based on. So Tex-Mex food, Tejano food specifically, is this like amalgamation of Mexican food with basically the ingredients that are available in the Southwest. So all these Mexican migrants moved into Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and even up into a little bit of like Southern California. And they brought this amazing rich food tradition with them that's been around for, centuries and centuries, but they didn't have access to a lot of the stuff that they had in Southern and Central America. And so they just kind of had to make do with what they had around, what they could source, right? There's like some really obvious things like cheese, for example, is not a huge part of Mexican food traditions, depending on the region, like anything. But like you can get a lot of cheese in America, right? Like it's everywhere. So specifically Tejano people who were settling in like the Rio Grande Valley area in Texas and southern and southwestern Texas built this really amazing food tradition that was built on this traditional Mexican food and cuisine, but mixing in not just like ingredients from Texas, but also, of course, ingredients from the other cultures who were settling in these areas too. And it created this thing that, when you kind of squint, looks really close to Mexican food. And if you don't really know very much about the differences, you might think is Mexican food, but really it's quite different, and there's a really vast gap. And so for me, it was really important to try to highlight that difference between Tex-Mex and Mexican food. There's a lot of great options in Grand Rapids, in West Michigan, especially like in Holland. A lot of great options for Mexican food, for non-traditional Mexican food, for authentic Mexican food. There's a place downtown that does pre-Hispanic food that is just like a really, really interesting look at what Mexican food was, you know, a couple centuries ago. And so for me, it's really important that we don't use words like traditional or authentic here. We are authentic to our vision, and we are authentic to what Tex-Mex and Tejano is, but because that's not really very well known around here, I wanted to make sure we're avoiding any confusion. I don't want folks to come in here expecting the same kind of experience that they can get any of the taquerias around town. Or at least if they do, to kind of unlearn that and understand, oh, this is what's different. This is how it's different. And then, of course, you know, I've been in Michigan for 13 or 14 years now. So the bulk of my training and experience in food has been here. And I think one thing that Michigan does really well with food is that focus on like seasonality and local produce, and a focus on like local producers. So it's been really fun for me to take that influence and kind of blend that into Tex-Mex as well, and kind of just evolve it into like a West Mich Tex-Mex kind of thing.
And when talking about menu items, how are people buying that? Are they getting it to go? Are they getting catering? What do you guys offer?
We offer basically everything except like curbside, and that's just mostly because I think people can come in now. So we do have a small catering business. That's something I'd really like to grow, and this year we've already done more in this first 3 months than we did all of last year, which is really cool. So there's kind of that side of the business, and that menu looks a little bit different than what we can offer in the restaurant. We really try to focus on simplicity for the catering menu, making sure that what's on offer there travels really well, holds really well, hits a price point that makes sense for the type of folks that we want purchasing from us. And then in the shop, it used to be a much more stark difference. It was somewhere around 65% of our business was takeout or delivery that first like 15-16 months that we were open. Now it's a much more even split, especially our weekend business has just skyrocketed. Since Christmas, our Saturday and Sunday business has grown 30%, and our weekday business is still growing just at a much slower rate, but weekends is all dine-in. It's a full dining room, been on a wait list a lot, which never happened last year. You know, all of 2022 no wait list, and now all of a sudden it's happening, which I'm very excited about. But during the week, it's a lot more takeout and delivery. Uber Eats, as much as I hate it, accounts for like somewhere around 15% of our business any given week. So it's one of those things where it's like, I think that the product is better if you come get it yourself or if you dine in, but a lot of folks really value the convenience and will pay for it, and that helps our business.
Do you have any plans on growing or expanding?
My biggest goal or our biggest target right now is to get to a point where I can spend more time working on the business rather than in the business. You know, we have a really tight staff, really small staff, and a lot of that has been by necessity, but we're now getting to the point where we can start to grow a little bit, and that means hopefully some opportunity for me to spend more time on things like marketing, but also on planning. I have other ideas that I would like to tackle. There's like something that happens when you start a business that like there's like a switch in your brain that turns on, and all of a sudden like you've never had any ideas before this first idea, and now like all you have is ideas. You know, so there's some other things that I'd like to pursue. I really love Basalt being a independent one-off neighborhood establishment. I think if this brand ever expanded, we'd look at like a smaller kind of like express kind of thing on a different side of town that could still offer the same quality, the same core experience, but I would really want to make sure that people were encouraged to come here to get the full, because the experience isn't just the food, it's the dining space, it's the people. A lot of small touches that I've done have been very intentional, like all the plants and the wood on the walls and all that. The idea is to have a place that feels very comfortable while you're having your meal, so that you're, you know, not just being nourished with food, but also like emotionally calm and that kind of thing. And I just don't know that I could replicate that somewhere else. So yeah, as far as like growth goes, obviously I want to grow this space. I'd really love to get a liquor license, but that has been a very challenging pursuit, mostly due to like city and state regulations. Also cost, it's like really expensive, but just really hard to get, like to even find one that's available right now. So that would be kind of like a short-term goal, would be a liquor license. But other than that, freeing my time up to pursue other things as well. But it's probably 3 or 5 years down the road.
If you recommend one dish to try here, what would you do?
I'm very proud of everything on the menu, and there are a handful of things that I think really capture us well. Probably, though, if I had to recommend one thing, it would be a breakfast taco. It's called the Mommy Dearest, and I'd recommend that for a couple reasons. One, it's got a lot of sentimental value to me, so that is like the first breakfast taco that I created that was not like really basic. So like at first I was just selling like bacon, egg, and cheese, chorizo, egg, and cheese, whatever. So the Mommy Dearest is the first taco I created that was like a specialty taco. And I created it with my mom, which is why the name. And the name's a bit of a joke too, because that movie. But that taco features our green chorizo, which was inspired by that place in LA that I was talking about. We had folks who were curious, but they didn't want to eat what we had because it was really pork heavy menu at the time. This was when we were still at the farmer's market. And so I was like, well, what can I do that's not pork, but like I can still cook with eggs, you know? And my mind just kept coming back to chicken, but I was like, what am I gonna like roast a chicken, like shred it? Like I just like couldn't figure it out. And then I remember that place in LA, and I was like, well, if he can make a bunch of types of chorizo, like I can make a type of chorizo. So that chorizo is it's a ground chicken is the base for it rather than pork. And we use a pepper and herb blend for the seasoning. It's really simple, but it is so fragrant and so bright. And because it's chicken too, it's like a really light chorizo. So really full flavor, but it's not very heavy or rich. You know, that taco is like a great way to experience basalt for the first time, a great way to experience like a breakfast taco for the first time.
What are your 3 tips of advice for other aspiring entrepreneurs or restaurateurs or anyone?
I think the most important thing is like just find a way, right? So could I have opened a restaurant right away? Absolutely not. That was not an avenue available to me. Like some folks can find investors or, you know, have family or friends who can help, and that's really awesome. But if you can't and you feel like, well, I just don't know how to get to that big step, like find the small step first, right? So for me, the small step was I can save $150 and sell a couple dozen tacos at the farmer's market. Was I going to get from that to a brick and mortar in 4 months? No. But, you know, with a lot of hard work, like I was able to make that happen in a year, right? And I'm very fortunate that time frame existed for me too, because it really is, it's like a snowball effect. Every small thing that you do, every baby step that you take really, really, really adds on. A second piece of advice would just be to like fortify yourself mentally and emotionally. However busy you think you're going to be, however hard you think it's going to be like 2 or 3 times that, you know? And the most challenging thing too is like, it's not like the hours that you're working. It's not, you know, it's not the planning. It's not all that. The most challenging thing is that once you own your own business, and especially in a restaurant, like there's always something you're dealing with. There's always a fire to put out. There's always something unexpected, some cost you weren't planning for, something that should work that doesn't, you know? So try to, from the get-go, like build your business with like emergency funds in mind. Try to figure out a way to be prepared for those unexpected things so that they don't threaten the stability of your business. And then a third piece of advice would be like ask for help. I could not have done any of this on my own, and I didn't do any of this on my own. Opening the space, like I had a few friends in here helping like for beer and pizza, basically. You know, like these walls are painted because there's a Pizza Hut across the street, essentially, you know. Ask for help, ask for input. Every perspective matters, even if you decide to do things the way you're thinking at first. Like you never know who's going to spark an idea that could radically change and improve and grow the idea that you already have. There are so many fundamental pieces of my business that would not be the same if I hadn't listened to my mom or a friend or a neighbor who walked by or a person at the farmer's market or one of my staff members. So like ask questions, ask for help, be open to advice.